So I'm friends with quite possibly the biggest Spider-Man fan of all time, and the new movie coincided pretty closely with his birthday, so I had to throw together something cool for him. I happen to have access to a free public 3D printer, so my project started with printing up a Spider-Man miniature from a file I found on Thingiverse. The drawback to this printer is that it has tons of issues, it fails about 90% of the time, and it's not great printing small, detailed pieces.
I missed the part where that's my problem.
But hey, can't argue with free. As I clean the print up a bit, you can observe the love-hate relationship of these two. For the connection points, I inserted a little thumbtack to make a hole, and then used a tiny segment of paperclip to kind of tack the pieces together, and then I just used some tacky glue to really strengthen it.
Take your hand off of me.
In my experience, this is significantly stronger than just gluing two pieces together and hoping that they stay, especially with plastic. Alright, now for the brick wall base. I grabbed some foam board and roughly measured out some of the brick strips and just chopped them to be relatively on scale with the miniature and chopped them into individual bricks. To get the brick texture, I just use this try and true rattle technique, which is super easy and seems to work really great. I grabbed a 4-pack of these magnets at the dollar store and I just had to remove this hard plastic shell.
We're not cavemen! We have technology!
Next, I made the substructure of the base with just some cardboard that I cut holes in to fit the magnets into.
How'd that get in there?
Then I glued the magnets in and attached the little baby magnets to Spider-Man's hands and feet with super glue. Then, after a quick Optimus Prime time, we have a sick little magnetic Spider-Man mini. And not only is it super satisfying to play with, but the magnets make it so much easier to paint, because you can stick it to all different kinds of things to grab onto. What I did next is something I tend to do a lot with builds that include 3D printed parts, simply because the printer makes tons of mistakes and the layer lines are very obvious. I just paint a little bit of tacky glue, slightly diluted, and I use it as kind of a filler to smooth out the whole thing and or buff out any unwanted indentations. This seems to be a bit easier than sanding, and it doesn't risk stripping too much detail or breaking the piece altogether, especially if it's a very small, delicate piece. I just find this to be much easier. Now going back to painting the base, I wanted to make a believable brick wall, so I assembled it brick by brick. This takes a bit of time, but it's strangely extremely relaxing and satisfying to me. I could do this for hours. I feel like the number of bricks that I lay is inversely proportional to my blood pressure. Alright, while I make the base, I might as well give my completely unsolicited opinion on the 3 Spider-Man series I've been around for. I absolutely love the Tobey Maguire Spider-Man movies, especially because those films produced the legendary Bully Maguire memes. In all seriousness though, I thought Tobey was a pretty solid casting for the role, and while few people would call any of his Spider-Man films masterpieces, I'd still watch any of those over the Green Lantern movie any day. Then came the Andrew Garfield films, and I gotta say, Screen Junkies kinda said it best. They made Peter Parker way too suave and cool to be believable as an outcast nerd, in my opinion. That kinda killed the immersion for me, and for that reason, the Amazing Spider-Man films weren't too memorable to me. When the third one was cancelled, I was pretty indifferent to the whole thing. However, I would have been devastated if the third in any other Marvel series was cut, especially if they had been building up to it. Then Homecoming came out, and I was pretty psyched for it and pleasantly surprised. I was glad to see the role go to someone who wasn't ridiculously famous already, someone who could kind of grow into the role a bit. And I'm sure a ton of people auditioned, and I'm really glad that Holland got it. Well, a lot of people said that the Tobey Maguire series got progressively worse and progressively cringier. I think the Tom Holland series actually got progressively better. Not to say that any of them were bad to begin with. I think they were all pretty good. What I think the Holland series got perfect was the balance of like silly quippiness and serious stakes. Anyway, that's my 2 cents. I'd love to hear what you guys think, though. This is something I love to hear people's opinions on. I could debate this all day. I'd love to hear what anyone else thinks about this, and if anyone can make a case for the Amazing Spider-Man movies, I would be interested to hear that. Let me know which series was your favorite. Honestly, I may have just liked the Tobey Maguire films the best because I was much younger and more impressionable, and I was just like absolutely blown away by it, but I think now I'm a little bit more jaded, and it takes a really good film to knock my socks off these days. For the color scheme of the wall, I was going for like a dark yet cartoonish flair that you might see in some older comic books in like a shadowy city alley where like a mugging happens perhaps. I think my first comic book growing up was Batman vs. Predator, and I recall really liking the saturated, dark, creepy ambience that they had. Anyway, I've learned to trust that the dark wash will always balance out whatever wacky paint job I do.
Find us some shade.
So I just go for as much diversity as I can to begin with, and then just blend it all together with the wash and perhaps a dry brushing. I think the dry brush and the wash are enough to unify the colors so that it doesn't really matter how crazy and outlandish the initial colors that you use are. That's just my theory.
Stop lecturing me, please.
After a heavy wash and a dab or two with some cotton to pick up the puddles, it's looking a lot better than I think it should for how much effort I put into this.
You're looking fine, babe.
Now for the wanted posters, I just looked around on Google a bit and found some great options. There were tons on there. And then I threw them into a standard printable PDF and then put them all different various size scales because I wasn't sure what was going to best equate to the project. And then I just printed them out at CVS.
I see Spider-Man posters.
After a quick brainstorm of how I was going to lay these out, I just did some weathering on the posters, and I call this my good old slip, rip, and dip procedure. Slip the posters across some sandpaper, rip the edges up a little bit with a razor, and then dip them into some black coffee or tea.
I'm gonna put some dirt in your eye.
It's easy, satisfying, and has really solid results. This whole step is just a blast for me. Optional fourth stage, drip. A couple tiny drops of black wash can be smudged into the paper while it's wet, and that'll have a pretty cool staining effect that I think is very believable as, water damage or whatever. Honestly, looks pretty good, if you ask me.
You're looking fine, babe.
Now for some paint scheme choices. I decided to go classic with the color scheme because it's just easier and simpler, and I'm not a great mini painter. I didn't want to have to worry about all the little tiny details that are metallic on the Iron Spider suit. To break up the monotony of this really simple paint job, I'm just going to splice in some of my favorite Bully Maguire clips.
Hey everyone.
Hey, Peter Parker.
You got something for me?
I had to beat an old lady with a stick to get this. Thanks, out nice. Okay. That all you got?
This is actually when Spidey sat on my fridge for about a week because at this point I was super intimidated to try to paint the eyes. I just knew I was going to mess it up, despite the fact that Spoderman would arguably have the easiest eyes to paint of any character in this scale due to the relative size on the mask.
Set him down, tough guy.
After some serious procrastination, I was ready to finish this project up.
Now dig on this.
Honestly, who just got that sweet transition? 2.5 hours well spent, if you ask me.
You were an embarrassment. Trash, bro. I'm gonna put some dirt in your eye. Now dig on this.
I'm sorry.
With all the main colors of the suit kind of blocked out, I quickly realized that there was no chance I was going to be able to paint all the little black webbing details with my brush. So I had the idea to use a fine point Sharpie, and I think it was a pretty good idea. This would be dark enough to stand out while also being pretty forgiving.
I'm gonna put some dirt in your eye. Good riddance.
The white parts of the eyes went on pretty easy, and like I mentioned, I bet painting Spider-Man's face is a really good place to start for beginners like me because of the accentuated size of those eyes. I was actually feeling pretty good about the eyes until I texted my buddy a photo, and he replied with this notorious meme.
It was at this moment that he knew. He f***ed up.
I don't feel well. I'm gonna go to sleep. Stings, doesn't it? Ooh, you were an embarrassment. Gonna cry?
Because my friend's birthday was the next day, I had unfortunately already hit it with a clear coat, and I didn't want to have to figure out how to paint over that and remove that. I knew if I tried to correct it, it was going to look way worse at this point, so I just decided to call it done.
You should have thought of that earlier.
Who is Spider-Man? He's a criminal, that's who he is. A vigilante, a public menace. Put it out on the front page. Cash money for a picture of Spider-Man. He doesn't want to be famous, and I'll make him infamous.
And honestly, I'm pretty happy with the outcome. I'm moderately sure that anyone who doesn't look too closely at it will probably not notice the wonky eye spacing, and if they do, maybe they'll get a good laugh out of it. When all is said and done, this wasn't intended to be some epic display piece, but rather kind of a nifty 2-in-1 fridge magnet for holding papers up or a calendar or something like that. And for that, I'd say mission accomplished. My friend loved the magnet and I had a blast making it for him. But what do you guys think of this thing? Would you put something like this on your fridge? Let me know if anyone wants to see more of these kinds of projects. And thanks for watching the video. And remember.
You're trash, Brock.
And remember.
With great power comes great...
Pizza time. Sorry I'm late. It's a jungle out there. I had to beat an old lady with a stick to get these cranberries.